Believe it or not, it's now been over a year since I launched this YouTube channel. So I want to start off this video by just thanking everybody who has listened to one of the podcasts or watched one of the videos in that time. You guys have seen me learn a lot more about podcasting. You've seen me struggle with the technical difficulties.
Testing out stuff. Seeing how this sounds, stuff.
And recently you've been watching as I have discovered and explored Seattle's stand-up comedy scene. But as somebody who's still relatively new to both of these spaces, comedy and podcasting I still feel like I have a lot to learn. Which is why for today's episode, I invited Adam Tiller to come talk to me about what it takes to pursue a creative career. Adam is a local stand-up comedian, and he also puts out a webcomic called Beefcake and Butterball. Plus, he hosts his own podcast called Fadam and Friends, where he has conversations with all sorts of interesting people. You should check it out. So he and I have a lot in common when it comes to our creative ambitions. I thought it would be super interesting to talk to somebody local who's also trying to pursue comedy and podcasting, but who has a little more experience under their belt and is a few steps ahead of me in the game. I had a lot of fun having this conversation with Adam. I hope you guys enjoy watching it too. Without any further ado, we're rolling.
We're rolling already? Okay.
Yeah, that's just kind of how I like to do it.
Yeah.
Jump into it.
Thanks for having me on, dude.
Thanks for being here, Adam. So I only got into the comedy scene like halfway through last year, in like April of 2022.
Yeah.
So I'm still really new to the whole scene, and it's taken me a while to kind of get through the rose-colored glasses of just like loving comedy and like loving the whole scene and starting to recognize like the different individuals and the roles that they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really impressed in like what you've been doing in the comedy scene. I think you're someone that really stands out both in your joke writing abilities and also like with what you're doing with the podcast and the entrepreneurial side of it. I know that you just, started your Patreon.
Yeah.
And quit your day job.
I did. Those were kind of like coincidentally happening at the same time. It wasn't I would love for people to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/FNFpod, but I'm not like, if you don't want to, I don't expect it. Like I would love for people to support what I'm doing, but it's not going to be the determining factor in what I do. Like I think it's a dangerous thing to like be making stuff based off of that. Like I want to be doing stuff that I'm like passionate about and wanting to be doing, and when money gets involved, it gets in the way of that sometimes. Like
absolutely, yeah, I know all about that. I have a question about that exact topic that I want to get to, but first I want to kind of start from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Will you just give me some context on like how you came to be where you are here doing comedy in your podcast in Seattle?
Yeah. Fuck, I'm trying to remember. The thing that, like, I'm sure as you go throughout this, like, I remember being in your position. Like, I watched the episode you did with Banji and Dan, and like, it took me back to what I was doing, just trying to like make sense of this really weird thing. Because there's like this underworld of Seattle that happens every night, and like you go into it and you're like, oh, these people are, big people, or like, oh, look at everything they're doing. I mean, everybody here locally on the local level for the most part is amateur. Like they're not doing it professionally. So it took me I remember going to Mike's and being like, everybody here is doing this for a living or whatever. Like, this is crazy. And it took me a long time to kind of make sense of all of that. And I think the best way to is like surround yourself with people that are funny and like that you respect what they're doing on stage. But like I came in, I had a couple people that were really helpful to me early on. Like, I did take a class too, which people shit on that constantly, which I understand, like paying money to learn how to do stand-up. Like it's, I don't know if you can necessarily teach for you to do stand-up, but I think the fundamentals are helpful. Like taking what somebody learned and applying it to your own path, I think is helpful. But like people like Jesse Warren, like he was doing stuff and gravitating towards like what they're doing and how they're getting better. And I think early on, I I put a lot of value on getting up in the best places I could, and I at times have like questioned that a little bit. Like I think as long as you're getting on stage and like writing and like doing what and being around funny people, that's important. Like that's what you should be doing. There's a lot of people I know that are super fucking funny and they weren't working clubs barely at all. So it's not, you don't have to be at the best room possible. If you can do a great room, awesome, do it. You'll learn. But, you know, yeah, that's the long winded answer.
No, that's great. So what year did you actually start doing comedy?
I don't know, like 2019 or something. It'll be
So pre-pandemic.
4 years in April, and I started like the podcast at the same time as stand up, like almost, I think like around the same week or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was your thinking when you did both those things? Was there like a trigger that like made you like jump into podcasting and comedy?
I don't know, man. Like I wish there are times where I wish I could go back. Um, like I there's a lot of stuff I put out that I can't listen to and watch, you know. Um, but I think one of the big things was there's a lot of like empty time when you start where you're like just hanging and shit. And there's value in hanging out, like doing that. I liked to work towards getting better at joke writing and things like that. So I used like the sponsors for my podcast as a way to like work joke writing out and like work voice acting and do these things. And it was just like it was a space that I didn't need, like there was no gatekeeper for. Like I got to control how much I do of it. And it started was I was doing like a podcast one week, a cartoon I released the next week, and did that alternating while doing stand up at the same time. And
yeah, I was going to ask you about the comic as well. Did
yeah.
that start at the same time as well?
Yeah.
You kind of like got into all three?
Dude, it was way too much in hindsight. But one of my best friends, Mike DeVore, he was another one of those people that like, he's always encouraging of people to like pursue stuff creatively. And it was something I learned from him is like when somebody has an idea, like ride with them a little bit on it, like let them flush it out. And like, even it's, and we were talking before this, every podcast is a lesson. Like you're going to look back at this episode in however many years and be like, oh, I wish I was doing this, this, and this, but
Sure.
You're not going to get better at doing it besides doing it, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of hating culture, I think, in stand up, like judgment and like, oh, this sucks and that sucks or whatever. It's like you go and do that shit and see how it looks for your end. Cause like there's a lot of people that have put stuff out that have made judgments about stuff, and like what they put out, I wouldn't put a stamp on either, you know? Like you have, just like stand up, like first time you did stand up, I'm sure it was way worse than what it is now. So like the actual craft of doing it is what makes it better. And I'm still learning at podcasting. Like I don't know what I'm doing still. I try to follow my instincts the best I can.
Did you have any like big influences when you were getting into comedy and podcasting, either or?
I think like unintentionally, my podcast was like structured after Ari Shafir's. Like I really identified a lot with like his like unspoken ideas on like, he lives a pretty minimalist lifestyle and he's about his art, you know, and a lot of people don't like Ari. Like they have a lot of problems with his shit. And I was a fan of his when I was like 12 or 13. I came across, there were, before YouTube was even a thing, like his videos came out. So I saw him on Rogan and then I started listening to his podcast and I was like, oh, this is like a path that somebody can have. Like I didn't know that even existed. And so definitely was influenced by his like podcasts. Stand up wise, I was going to a lot of stand up shows. So I was like, I had a lot of people that I liked probably the person that I like value wise have always appreciated was Stanhope. Like that's just like what he actually stands for with his comedy. Like where he's playing to the back of the room and he doesn't give a fuck if the front cares.
Yeah.
I got away from that for a long time and I'm trying to sort of like get back to it, I think. But
Yeah. So on that note, like, how have you seen your comedy change over the time you've been doing it, and like as you found your voice?
I don't know, man. I like it's like literally everything that I do in this space, like 2 years from now, I'm gonna look back and be like, I hate this, but that's good because it's like there's growth.
Yeah.
You see growth. You have to put yourself out there. And I think early on, I realized that I needed to fail in order to grow. So there was a lot of that. But you're here locally, like, there's a lot of pressure tied to whether or not you can do this craft on whether or not you agree with a certain set of ideals. And I wasn't born in Seattle. Like, I was trying to just be a comic here, and like, you can't say this, you can't do this or whatever. And like, but you're like, but that's still funny. Like, why can't and so there's definitely a lot of pressure here locally to perform and think a certain way. And as you do it longer and get more opportunities, you realize like, oh, it's sort of a bubble. And, getting down south, going different areas. Like, I think somebody said, I can't remember, you have to pick the line that you draw and deal with it. And like, I'm getting closer to doing that. I think being okay with like, yeah, I'm not for everybody. And most of those people didn't want to hear what I said to begin with, like, I'm sure you get it too. Like, just being a white dude, like, there's a lot of people that don't want to hear what you have to say just based on that. And I have always been like really confused by that, where it's like, you have an opportunity to like maybe influence my thinking or like, and there have been awesome people in comedy who have done that. Like Andy Awancia, she is like a close friend, and I've learned so much from my relationship with that person, and doesn't judge me for what I am, which I think is really important.
I think it's also part of the challenge too, though, and I think it's something that I've seen you maneuver really well, is how to win over an audience, like, no matter what they are like when they get that first impression, how to turn it around and get them onto your side. Like, that's part of the fun of the thing.
Yeah, I don't have a face that's great for fucking Seattle audiences. It's I don't know. There's a lot of factors that come into play too. Is like, how old are you?
20? I just turned 30.
Oh, you just turned 30. Okay.
How old are you?
33. So like, as you get older too, like, how audiences perceive you changes. Like, when you get in front of like a 19-year-old audience, and like, you still look 25 probably. I had like a younger looking fit. As I'm getting older, I think it's starting to affect, like, if I get start pushing on an idea, it's like I'm talking down to younger people. And like, I don't know. It's hard, dude. This shit's like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really get to pick what you think is funny either. That's the thing that sucks the most, is like, you can either concede to what other people think is funny or pursue what you think is funny and make it consumable by larger audiences. But if you just do what other people think, like, then you're not yourself. So I'm like, yeah, what the fuck is the point? It's confusing. I don't know.
Yeah. Why do you think that making people laugh is important? Why is it meaningful to you?
I don't know. I think a lot of comics, like, they get off on making audiences laugh. Like, that's their thing. For me, it's always been like getting the joke to work, like the puzzle of it. It's like figuring out jokes, and I think it's changed, but I don't know. It's like, it's not a winning or losing. It just feels right. Like I had so much shit happen to me when I was younger that I like had to, I think like sort of like figure out how to like soothe myself, like you dealt with trauma. So you were either going to cry or you're going to laugh, and you figured out how to start laughing about it. And so like, if you can pass it on to other people, it's cool, but like it just comes naturally in a lot of ways. Like I I don't really know. That's a good question. I should probably think about that a little bit more.
Oh, it's interesting to hear what you have to say. I always am interested in like what people decide to spend their time on, what they're passionate about, and like what's driving that.
Yeah,
So yeah, something to think about.
it changes too, I think. Like when you start, it's just like, hey, can I get a laugh? And then over time it's like that's not enough anymore. Like the what you want to do is like you want to consistently be getting better. So like something I'm working on right now is just trying to be less rote, like sounding more natural on stage. And it's been something that I've struggled with for a long time because like I started in clubs. When you do club comedy, it's like very presentate, like you have their full attention.
Yeah.
And I'm doing more like bars and road rooms and shit, and it's loosening that up a little bit. Um, Stylistically, I think it's a taste thing, but I'd like to be able to do both,
Yeah.
I respect both aspects of it.
When it comes to writing a joke, and like obviously when it comes to comedy, what's funny is what matters the most. But how do you like balance the line of like telling the truth versus like, maybe exaggerating the truth for the joke, and like walking that line? Has there ever been a joke that you felt like this is funny, but like I'm not going to tell it because it doesn't feel like true to me? Or are there jokes that you're like, this is just totally made up, but it's so funny that like I have to tell
Um, it's a good question. I've I was like influenced early on just on the idea of like the truth is always funnier. Like something that's true will hit harder and connect more. Like when somebody's not telling the truth on stage, you can feel it. Like when I started, I hosted like a motherfucker, dude. Like I hosted every weekend for almost a year at clubs, and like so I saw a lot of headliners, and I saw like just by like sitting back there and seeing like what works, what doesn't work, and how they change like different acts and stuff, like stuff that was like kind of cute or exaggerated in a way that was clear that it wasn't based in truth. Like it just didn't. It was sort of like the audience could sniff it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I tend to gravitate towards the truth and then maybe exaggerate for um there was a book I read on comedy writing. I think it was The Onion. Uh like their I don't know what the fuck it was called, but they were talking about using exaggeration as a comedic tool. And when you exaggerate, you should exaggerate beyond space and time. So, like, exaggerate so far that it's clearly a joke. And you have to go that far for an audience to, like, fully understand that it's an exaggeration.
Yeah.
So, like, Rodney Dangerfield's joke about I had to give a urine sample and there was an olive in it. Like, that's exaggerating beyond space and time, like, and yeah.
Is there a like most memorable bomb that you've ever had?
Yeah, this one always kind of like sticks with me. It was right after the pandemic, and it was a heckle. Like it wasn't as much a bomb. I mean, I've seen worse bombs than I've experienced for sure. Like one time I won't say who it is, but it was a 220 person room, like full, like just great room and stuff. And something happened at the front of the room, and it like caused the audience to not like buy in initially to the set. And then once, like, it was like a drink fell or some shit like that. And once it was cleared up, the act was continuing to go, and there wasn't any like addressing this thing that happened. So all the people in the middle of the room, like they hadn't bought in yet to what this was. And so it started like spreading like a cancer. And by like 4 or 5 minutes in, it was so quiet in this room. And it was like you could hear like glasses and like silverware and shit like that. It was a 10-minute set. And it was the quietest room I've ever been in comedy wise. And it's to have that many people together and just seeing someone running an act, like it was brutal for me. It was right after the pandemic, and I made a joke basically about Zoom comedy and some of the stuff that happened in Minnesota, like tying those two things in together. And I just had some lady from the back of the room just yell out like, "Too soon." And it iced the room, dude, like so hard. And it was just like, I hadn't been on stage for 9 months or whatever it was. So it was like jarring. And it was the nicest heckle of it. Like the sweetest and hardest hitting heckle I had experienced. But
wow.
Yeah.
Did you do Zoom comedy yourself during the pandemic? How was that?
I did like 2 shows or something. I wasn't doing it a bunch, but it was weird, you know. It was weird during the pandemic. Like podcasting kind of saved my ass during that. Like just having an outlet to like hold yourself accountable. But yeah, I don't want to do Zoom comedy.
It seems
Did
terrible.
You do it?
No.
Yeah.
I got into comedy after the pandemic.
That's good,
so,
yeah.
But I've heard the horror stories.
Yeah, it was pretty. I mean, I think they got better about it, but it's just like you tell a joke and then there's like a 5-second delay and then people start laughing and it like throws off your timing. But I mean, people got to work, so I get it.
Yeah.
It was strange. But.
So on the flip side, is there a point that you'd say is like the highlight of your comedy or podcasting career so far that you've been like, you've had a moment where you've been like, damn, I'm doing it?
I don't know. I think, as cheesy as it sounds, like a couple weeks ago, I was just like hanging out at Tony V's, and that's like the room I run in Everett, and like Quinn Fitzgerald and I were there, and it's cool to see like there's been a huge wave of people come in after the pandemic, and seeing people like find out about Tony V's and like coming up there and doing it, like that's been really rewarding to me. Like just seeing what that room has sort of become and what it continues to be, and like the hang of it, and seeing people get better. Like I am like stoked on what I'm seeing locally. Like when I came in, there weren't that many people that were like getting up every night. It wasn't a normal thing. And there are a bunch of people that are doing that now. And I don't know what the catalyst has been for that, but it's fucking cool to see. Like there's not as many people that are just like hobby comedians or whatever. They're actually like driving these crazy. I mean, we were in Aberdeen together last weekend. And it's like 4-hour drive, like crazy show, and you know, but that's what it is. So that I think that's where I'm at right now, is like not taking those moments for granted. Like I think a lot of people tend to look forward, and I was doing that for a while, and I'm like trying to like be a little bit more present.
It's good stuff. Be here now.
Yeah.
It's the key, man.
I got some questions for you too. I hope I get, do I get a chance to ask you a couple things?
If you want to,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been like, I was watching all week. I watched the Murder Mountain thing.
Yeah.
And,
you enjoying it?
I mean, I had seen it before.
Yeah.
I think like at episode 5, it starts to like kind of trail off a little bit and not be as good. But like you grew up there, right?
That's my neck of the woods.
Who did you know in the documentary?
So I don't know.
Can you say names? Or like
I don't know any of like the big players. Well,
yeah.
I know the one guy at the end who they have the footage of arresting in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
So have you heard my Murder Mountain bit that I do?
No.
So I do a bit about it that on the theme of what we were talking about, like maybe mixes up the truth a little bit, distorts it for the comedic effect a little bit.
Yeah.
But I know one of the guys that was arrested in it. His name was also Zach, which was weird. It was like the other Zach at the school. I'm trying to decide at what length I should go into this story. There were two guys named Zach Harrison at my high school. And I kind of conflate the two in my mind because they were both assholes. And one of them ended up being the guy in the documentary, and the other guy wasn't in the documentary, but was kind of a bully and like got in a bunch of fights. And I just kind of combined them into one character for my story. But yeah, so I knew him. And then there's like just people in like some of the photographs, like episode 2, when they are going into the history of Humboldt and they're talking about like all the hippie communes and stuff. Like you can see one of my English teachers in one of those photos. Yeah. And you can see like one of my friend's moms is like in the scene where they're like at the, whatever it is, like the board meeting, they're talking about how legalization has impacted the community. Like that's one of my friend's moms. Like, so it's just like a bunch of small random cameos. That had to have been just
such a weird place to grow up.
It was a trip for sure. It's
like
unlike,
how old were you when you started smoking weed?
I mean, my relationship with weed has been a long and complex story. So like I was growing weed when I was a kid. Like I was helping my parents grow and stuff. And so it was kind of like the thing I rebelled against. Like it was such a dominant thing in the culture that like my way of like being like, fuck you, mom. Anti-weed. Yeah, I was like, I'm not going to smoke weed.
Yeah.
So the first time I smoked was with my mom, and I was pretty young. I don't know exactly how old I was, but I was pretty young.
Like under 10?
Yeah, probably. Damn. But then I didn't do it again for years and years. Yeah. I like took my stance and I'm like, I hate weed. And
do you remember were you high when you were like that young?
It's hard to say. I remember really trying to feel like, am I high? But I don't feel like I really felt it the first couple times.
You definitely would have like felt it. Because I remember it took me like 7 times till the first time I actually felt it.
The first time I really felt it, I was an adult.
Yeah.
So like once I moved away from Humboldt, it didn't feel like it was all consuming and stuff. And then I started smoking weed, and now I smoke all the time and reap the benefits and go back home and people gift weed, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, I have to imagine like the whole legalization thing has just like I read somewhere that in Oregon they've had to like resort to like stockpiling edibles essentially because or just like the oil based out of it or based to make it, because there's so much extra product and it's driven the price down so low that its legalization has like killed the black market.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like a lot of the small players, the mom and pop growers, like my family hasn't grown in a long time.
Yeah.
But people who were like my family growing up that were just a small batch of plants or whatever, they really got the short end of the stick because like once it got legalized, basically there were so many like fees and permits and stuff that in order to even participate, you had to have a lot of money just to get into the game. And so you got all these big companies like Coca-Cola and stuff moving into Humboldt to buy property to like grow weed, but like all the small growers who were like doing it in the black market for years and years really got shafted with the legalization. And like my hometown's drying up. It's a sad scene over there these days.
Yeah. I feel like conflicted about it because it's like, they weren't following any law. There's that argument of it.
Yeah.
But then it's also like that was what it was, and then it went corporate, and like then it just there should have been like some kind of intermediate like in between, where it's like these smaller growers became part of a collective or something. But
and there's a couple like efforts to do that kind of stuff, but there's definitely still like illegal growers, even though it's legal, who like aren't getting the permits and stuff, and they're like redirecting the resources to like busting those people. So like the situation hasn't changed all that much. Like there's still people growing illegally.
It's fucking wild, man.
Yeah, it's a crazy world.
It was a good documentary though. I like the guy that was always wearing like the bandana over his face. And, like, he was the self defined outlaw or whatever. There's some wild shit up there.
There is a lot of wild shit. The other good documentary that is along a similar vein is on Hulu. It's called Sasquatch,
Okay.
and it's kind of like Murder Mountain, but it's about a different mountain, which was actually like when I was growing up, the mountain with all the lore. You know, like Murder Mountain, that was a mountain called Alder Point. And that one, like, I mean, there's growers everywhere. Like you can pick a mountain, there's a murder on it probably in those parts. But Spy Rock is the other mountain. That's where Sasquatch takes place. And that's the one that, like, growing up, you'd hear shit. You'd hear about people being on the run and people being found decapitated and, like, all this crazy stuff happening. So when Murder Mountain came out, it was like, oh, they chose the wrong mountain.
Yeah.
And then this other documentary comes out about Sasquatch. And it's like, well, at least they got
Is that
one thing
good,
right.
though? Is it a good doc?
Yeah, it's entertaining.
Yeah.
It's fun. You know,
I'll
all
check
that
it
stuff is, like, kind of sensationalized. And, like, you have to have fun watching it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for, like, whatever the thing on, what was it, CHAZ here in Seattle.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be a documentary about that. And, like, I never went down there, but I have to imagine it was just, like, people getting high and hitting drums and stuff. Like, it wasn't.
It was, yeah, it was really interesting. Like, I live so close that I was going over there all the time, and there were a lot of different, it was very emotional. It's like the whole thing's so traumatic. Like, if a documentary did come out, I don't even know if I'd be ready to watch that yet. You know, I did one of the first episodes I did was about that.
Really?
Because there's a local reporter who, what are they called? It's escaping me right now. I'm forgetting the name of their media source. I'm gonna add it onto the screen. But
Evening Magazine.
no, it's like the black media, Converge. Okay. That's what they're called, Converge Media. And the guy who runs that was the guy, like, on the front lines. If you saw, like, the famous pink umbrella video when all that stuff was going down where there was, like, the barrier and they were holding the pink umbrellas up and they all got, like, sprayed and gassed.
I didn't see it, no.
It was like it's a really shocking video. He's the guy that was on the front lines taking that video. So, like, one of the reasons why I started this podcast was just because I wanted an excuse to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
I was like, he lives in my neighborhood. Like, he's someone who I think would say yes. And, like, it'd just be good to, like, talk to him and, like, process all that shit that we went through. And it was a good conversation, but yeah.
So he said yes, though?
Yeah, he said yes. He was my second guest on the podcast. He was really cool about it.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it was really interesting. But it's a hard one for me to rewatch that episode. Like, once I did that episode, it was like, it got it out of the system.
Yeah.
And now yeah.
Dude, there's a couple I've had like that where you're just like, you're going for one thing and then it really hits an emotion. And, like, I don't know. I'm trying to get more to, I mean, is this, like, comedy themed or is it?
No, I mean, this podcast, again, started before I was doing comedy. So you're only one of, I mean, you, Dan, Banji, and Duncan Trussell are the only comics that have been
crazy,
on this podcast. Yeah. So it's not comedy themed. And I've tried, one of the reasons why I stopped doing the podcast for a while too, is because I was getting into comedy and I was trying to figure out how to, like, merge those worlds, because I knew there were a lot of comics that do podcasts and I was like, where do I fit in? Where's my place here? Like, this was never intended to be a comedy podcast, but this is what I'm interested in right now.
Yeah. So
figuring that out has been why, like, I stopped for a few months and only picked it up recently and started having comics on.
Yeah, man. It's fun to do. I don't know. I think just doing podcasts with a lot of comedians, you get all these different perspectives. And there's not, like, one right. Like, I think every comic has the idea of, like, oh, this is the right way to do this. And that's one of the benefits I've gotten from, like, talking to a lot of comics, is seeing, like, the through line and, like, what should matter to me and what, you know, I can leave aside. And it's hard to, like, make sense of all this stuff. Like, I'm sure you feel it too, like, when you're going and doing sets and stuff, like, there's very little that you can, like, hold on to and, like, you make assumptions off of, and then, like, a couple weeks later you're like, oh, that assumption was completely flawed, like, I shouldn't have used that as a basis. And like, one thing I do think really helped me a lot was, like, seeing somebody who I genuinely thought was funny and talking to that person, assuming they're not a dick, and, like, getting feedback from them. And I think that helped me grow a lot. It was hard to do and it hurt a lot, but like the more I did that, the better I got faster. So
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, and that's definitely been one of the big gains for me, like getting into the comedy community, is like when I did start this podcast, I was coming out of COVID, and it was like basically like a desperate way of trying to like have conversations with people after being isolated for so long, you know. But like I didn't know anyone else who did podcasting, you know. I didn't know anyone else who like, I didn't know many people who were even interested in like creating content, nonetheless like humor, you know, like focusing on that. So like being in the comedy scene is like, oh wow, now there's this whole like world of other people who like this is what they're thinking about too. So it's been a really good thing. But my perspective also shifted in terms of like, I guess, what having a comedian on the podcast means, because as an outsider, it's kind of like you have a comedian on and you're like, great, I did it. I covered comedy on the podcast, you know? But then like the more you're like in it, the more you see just all the different types of people and different like walks of life that people come from.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's an aspect of it where we're not as interesting or unique as we think we are, you know. Like that's one thing I picked up on early, where I was like interviewing all these comics. I'm like, every one of them talks about themselves like they're like the only person that's ever existed. And then I realized, oh, it's just narcissism, you know. Like it takes a certain personality type to go on stage and want all that attention.
Yeah.
And I have done a lot of podcasts, and like the ones who've done better have had a theme to it, or like a story or something. Like most people don't give a shit. Like they don't, what I have to say right now, they probably don't care. And I say that like respectfully, where it's like, I got to create a reason for them to care.
Yeah.
And be interesting or original, or like put something together. Like it's that, I think releasing content, one of the best things I got from it was that feedback loop of like, just like doing sets where like you put stuff out, you get feedback, and then you can say, oh, this wasn't very good, or whatever. And I continue to do that. Like I watch I'm sure there'll be clips of this or that I'll see like, fuck, like I just sound like a douchebag, you know. But then you learn from that, and hopefully it like, you know, cements in.
Yeah.
So it's helpful.
On that note, I'm curious, when you started like going from like doing open mics to actually posting like comedy online, because that's something that I've been like approaching, but I'm like very intimidated by. So how far into starting comedy were you when you started actually sharing your comedy online? And did anyone you know in real life like react? Do you have any jokes about people you knew in real life or like anything like that?
I still have a set online from like, I don't know, 6 months in or something. I want to say 10 minutes, and I put it up there, and I probably will take it down. I kind of like to keep that stuff up just for the sake of like somebody that's newer can look back on that and be like, oh, that's what he was doing then. And I've posted a lot of stuff, crowd work in specific, like particular, and I haven't been doing it as much lately just because I just haven't had my camera on me or haven't prioritized it. I would say like having your ear trained is really important before you're like putting out shit. Like I wasn't putting out stuff for the most part until I knew like what a good response from an audience was. And it's weird when you're like, you see somebody put up a clip and there's not laughter going on, and they're just putting up this. And so is it like, hey, I'm putting this up because I did a set? Like, okay, I understand that or whatever, but like comedians that see that are going to look at it and be like, is this actually funny? If the audience isn't laughing, it's either a bad audience or the joke isn't funny. So if there's no laughter and it's just you on stage, then it's just like you doing, like you getting a pat on the back for being brave enough to go up there. That's cool. Like I get that. I understand. But like, if you want to be a comic, it should be funny. Like that's, and it's crazy to me. I don't know if it's a Seattle thing or whatever, like the taste aspect of it. Like, it should make you laugh. Like, that's your job. It's not about like telling a story. It's about like, is it funny? Is it generating laughter? And if not, that's not comedy. Like, it can be something else, but like, you're doing stand up comedy. Like, do you want, and there's not, it took a while to figure that out for sure. So I don't put up a lot of bits, mainly because every time I think I've figured out a joke, then I realize it's not done yet. And I I don't know. I am precious about my material that people don't give a shit about, but it's like crowd work is feels like a happy medium. But I don't know. All that stuff is so the whole thing is douchey to me. Like I don't like social media. I don't like any of that stuff. I think it's necessary to get your stuff out there, but I don't like it. Do you? I mean, it's
Drives me nuts.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to tolerate it more because I need to start engaging with it more. But yeah, it's terrible.
I think people spend more time on that than they need to. Probably myself included.
I feel like it's one of the hardest parts of the job, but you're somebody who I think does a really like consistent job with that, and it's one of the things that I admire about the way that you do it too. Is like you're on top of it, you're doing like very consistent, and like that's what it takes to build an audience. What's your like routine like in terms of that? Like, do you have like, especially as like a self-motivated, creator, do you have a way of making sure you stay on schedule?
I know that like I wake up and these are sort of the things that I owe for the day. Like I need to like get the stuff out there that I can. I'm not like I'm consistent, but it's not hitting super hard. So like I see other people doing social and they're doing it way better than me. I guess it's like my medium where I'm like, oh, I'm putting something out, but it's not like I don't add effects and caption like extra like silly faces and things like that. That's the stuff that works, dude. It does. And I just don't, I'm not good at that stuff. I don't really, I mean, you do video stuff, like you'd probably be pretty good at it, but like, I didn't get into this because I want to be on Instagram. Um, it's necessary in some regards, but I also like, there are times too where I'm like, how many tickets does this actually generate? How many views does it actually generate? And how many more arguments does it create? Like I really grapple with it and I don't want to be doing it, if I'm being completely honest. I think it's been something that became like a muscle for me and I thought was necessary, but I think I see other people who don't do any of that stuff and they're very funny, and that's like the commodity is if you're really funny and you can be funny conversationally and be a good hang, like that will take you a lot farther than so okay, say you had 100,000 Instagram followers
Mm-hmm.
and I knew you and it was like, oh, I can work with this person. Even if I like do something with you, if you're not funny, what are we doing? Like that's the space we're in. So what like I that's the thing that should matter the most. Unfortunately, like the money is what drives most of the action in this. So there's got to be like some happy medium, but it sucks.
That's
Yeah.
a tough balance to strike. I think that's what we're all trying to strive for on some level, huh?
It just, dude, I refuse to like I see some of this stuff on TikTok, like that comics are doing and like or just other people. And like if I ever get to that point, like just kill me, honestly. Like I'm not gonna do a character. I'm not like I get it that it sells tickets and it gets you opportunities, but at some point you gotta draw the line, right? Like if
Yeah.
you get on stage and people are like, do the Zach voice or whatever it is, like I don't think I could do it. That's not why I got into comedy. Like I'm a creative person and it was an outlet for me, but I didn't get into like be the blank guy. Like that's not what I guess it might end up happening if my podcast gets successful, but I don't see that happening either. So
Sorry, I'm just taking a minute
no,
to
you're good.
look over my notes here. Do you feel like the more time you've spent trying to turn your passion into a career, that it's like sucked the joy out of it, the fact that you're trying to monetize it?
Yeah, for sure. It has gotten better recently. Like I've figured out some things recently that I think are really helpful, and dealing with not failure, but I think I was really tolerant. And Bo Johnson, I'm sure you know Bo.
Mhm.
Like he said something one time to me about like it was after the pandemic, dealing with toxic people, and he was like talking about, oh yeah, this is just stand-up comedy, like you gotta deal with toxic people. And then he had like gone, and I think he got like some therapy or something like that, and like it knocked it loose. No, you don't. Like you don't, like, just because you're doing this job doesn't mean that you have to be around people that are toxic. And there's a lot of them in entertainment. Like it's not specific to this scene, it's like across the board. And that can look like a lot of different things. And like I'm really, what I'm trying to prioritize this year is not spending time with and around people that I find to be that way. I tolerated it for a long time and I thought it was necessary, and it really fucked up the way I was feeling and thinking about my comedy. And like ask yourself when you're around some of these people, like, is this person like somebody I genuinely enjoy? And if not, don't fuck with them. Like you don't have to. I mean, if you don't get a gig, you don't get a gig. Like it's not gonna break anything. And you being miserable about somebody else's shit, like it's going to suck the joy out. So that's sucked more joy than anything. And I've seen other people have that be the case. And working with people just for the money that you can't stand to work with, like just work a shitty job. Like if you're just doing it for the money, like go, there's stuff that pays way better. Like I just don't, and maybe do it in doses, but fuck that, man. Like just not interested in spending all my time and energy being around people that make me feel that way. And it sucks to like cut some folks out, but sometimes you got to do that. I mean, and maybe I'll revisit some of this stuff, but like there was a lot of pain and uncomfortability. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a grown ass man. Like I don't have to do this anymore. So
Yeah, there's a lot of I guess networking politics in comedy that can be kind of interesting to navigate, especially at first. It's part of the game, I guess.
Yeah, there's not a map for you either. Like I felt like as I was podcasting, I found that map. Like one thing that I think is useful to know, and I heard Burr say this one time. He's like, yeah, it's all like a big ass illusion. Like we're all comics. Just because I'm like doing it a couple years before you doesn't make me any different than you. Like I might have some experience or knowledge. We're both trying to do the same thing, to generate laughter from these people. And we're both probably emotional, sensitive people that want to like get that joy. Like there's a reason why you're going up there. Something happened to you to warrant you wanting to go up there. And like a real comic is that way. Like they don't lose sight of that. Like that's one thing I really have like dialed into recently. Is like I want to go back to the first time I started doing this and like what I was trying to do. And it was just to get jokes to work and like laugh with my friends. And it wasn't about like, oh, is this person gonna like me? Or like, am I gonna get on their show or whatever? Like, fuck it. Like it's just not fun too. Like there's nothing fun about that. Like
Yeah.
and it's hard to keep that your priority. It's you literally everything, money, time, like opportunity, it pushes you to not pursue that stuff. And I've seen a lot of people drop off because of that shit. And I guess for me, like the number one goal is to do comedy today and hopefully tomorrow. Like that's success. Whether or not there's money to be made, that's great. But like I can do stand up whether or not I'm getting paid to do stand up. I just don't want to stop doing stand up. And I think that maybe make me a little different than a lot of other people. Like there's a lot of people who have success here that don't have that be their priority. Like their goal is to make as much money possible doing this. And to me, that's not that funny. Like I just, it's cool. Like you can make money doing this, but are you funny? Like there's a lot of people that make a lot of money doing stand up that are fucking crazy. Like they're not funny people and they're not fun to be around. And people don't talk about that at all for the most part. Like
Yeah.
you'll see it when you start hosting for some of these people. Like my buddy John told me this story about Chris Kattan at the Houston Improv. And like John, he's like fucking 6'3" or something. He's a big guy. And Chris Kattan is 5'4", whatever. You can look it up. But like John came out to Chris, they were outside of the Houston Improv. And he was like, "Hey Chris, like just want to say like I loved your set or whatever." And Chris looked up to him, grabbed him by like the chin, and just goes, and then walks away, like kind of like skips away into the night. Like it's so cute that you enjoy me. And that's fucking crazy, dude. It's super weird. That's another human being. And that's what like that's how I mean, do you know how much like he's objectifying that person at that point?
Yeah.
That's fucked up. And so he sells however many tickets. That's what matters. Like that's what we're placing value on in this space. Like, and there's a lot of people who'd be like, "Oh, if I could feature for Chris Kattan, I would." And it's like, I don't think I would. I'm good. Like I've heard enough things that are like, you hear shit like that from people in front of you, and like you can avoid a lot of awkward shit if you do. Like there's some crazy stuff in this space. Like,
Yeah, that's certainly true.
I mean, have you had any interactions yet with anybody being a lunatic?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of characters. I'll say that much. You know, there's definitely some people, especially as I was like getting used to the scene, like kind of what I was saying earlier is like you know, when I was taking in the whole tapestry of the comedy scene, you know, and then you start to like realize who the individuals are that are contributing to that tapestry. And you're like, okay, maybe this person that like I initially didn't pay much attention to, maybe they're actually like part of the problem that like I just wasn't looking at, you know.
Yeah.
Or like maybe this person like is, you know, yeah, there's a lot of people who I saw one way at first, and that perception has changed over time.
Dude,
in the short time I've been in the scene.
They're charismatic. Like the job is to be charismatic and like interesting and captivating and stuff. So like there are a lot of people that are really good at doing that conversationally and shit. And then you see them do stand up and you're like, oh, that's not good at all. And like I do think actually I was gonna say one thing. I was gonna say that if somebody's funny, it tends to be like they're worth like talking to or whatever. I don't believe that anymore because there's a lot of funny people I know that are fucking maniacs, and it's I hate the phrase, but like a vibe thing. Like you'll gravitate who you gravitate, and then like if people do shit to you that you don't like don't discount it. You know, like if you don't like being around that, don't be around that person. Like nobody's making you, and
Yeah.
it's hard. It's fucking weird. I wish that like going back when I started, somebody. I mean, I'm in a different situation now where I have a little bit more freedom of schedule, but like nobody is preventing you from starting your own thing. Like if you don't like being in a particular space, start your own show, start your own mic or whatever. Like in New York, they do that constantly. And it creates an indie scene where like everybody benefits from it. There's like more more comedy is never gonna hurt anybody.
Yeah.
But when there's like scarcity and the number of spots and who's better than who and all that shit, like just go do your own thing. I mean, they do shows in apartments and fucking like bars and hair salons and shit like that. Like if somebody's telling you no or you don't like being around anybody, just go start your own thing and you'll learn too. That's the big thing. Is like I never try to shit on anybody like trying to put in work. Like that's one thing that I value a lot. I did shit on the reels thing or whatever, the Instagram, like putting out bad sets. But if you have a solid reason behind why you're doing it, I don't give a shit. Like I'm not gonna watch it though. It's
So you made me think of a question, which is there a reason why you've decided to kind of be located in Seattle? Because you're not from here originally, right?
No.
You're from Vermont, is that right?
originally from Burlington, yeah.
Yeah. So like you're not from Seattle, and like the comedy scene here is good, but like people think of LA or New York when they think of comedy. So is there a reason why you've chosen to be in Seattle?
It's a good question. I mean I started here and I think I've done probably what I like what I can do locally. I've heard from a lot of people like do as much as you can locally before you make that move. I don't think it's like skill wise you're not gonna suffer from like staying in your local scene too long, but I think you can move too early and it's helpful to like get fundamentals down. I do think you can move too late where when you go to those places, whatever you're doing right now, you're going to the back of the line and you got to prove yourself. And so there's been some hesitancy that like I have some friends in New York. They're like, "Hey man, don't rush it. Like this isn't going anywhere." I also don't know if I want to live in New York. That's one thing I kind of like the road. Like I like being in weird places and like I don't I didn't get into this so that I could be in the best friends club. Like I like being with the people that I like being around. I don't really like being forced into socialization. And so somebody explained this to me like when you start stand up it's kind of like going to college. You're learning, you don't even really realize it. Like you're learning these skills and these things and going out every night. And then eventually like you go and get the work and like they're like, can you do 30 minutes? And no, there's no like, this is when you're ready to do that. And there are people that are doing 30 minutes right now. That's really bad, dude. Like there's some horrible comedy on the road. Like shit that you'd seen. You're like, they're getting paid to do this and they consistently get paid. And it's, I don't know the rationale or whatever. So like you go, you study, and you either stop studying and you like monetize whatever you can. There's a lot of like, it's pretty wide open. I like that aspect of it. It can lead itself to bad habits too, you know. But the first time you do longer sets like that, you're never gonna be ready for it. You just like do it. And then you realize like, oh, nobody in Wenatchee gives a fuck about this thing that I'm talking about in Seattle. Okay, what do I do from there? Do I make it more universal or do I drop that bit and make something else? Or do I keep that bit and tell Wenatchee to go fuck themselves because they're Wenatchee? Like it's, you have to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And, you know, being around like Andrew Frank, I don't know if you know him at all.
I know him, but
you
not
know
very
of
well.
him at
Yeah,
least. Like,
we've met once or twice.
if anybody's watched, like check out Andrew Frank's comedy, and he teaches a class in comedy, and like that motherfucker. I don't know if we like socially see eye to eye on most things, but he has helped me out like as a comic and as a person so much. Like he's a great human being, and like it's like little things like that where you're like, oh, I just got my ass kicked at this show. What do you think about these things? And you just can like break. He's been doing it for like 16 or 18 years or something like,
wow.
And not big dogging you or like making like, oh, let me teach you a class now or whatever. Like he empathically teaches, which, there's a lot of advice being given that's not even for you. It's like it's for the person giving the advice, like for them to like, let me tell you because I know, rather
Right.
than like, hey, can I, like, this is information that might be helpful to you. There's a big difference there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's a red flag to me almost any time too. It's like somebody asking you whether or not you want feedback versus just like hammering you on the head with it. Like, they're not like, who gives a fuck how long they've been doing stand up for? Like, they might not know you. Like, you didn't ask for their opinion. Like, if I just walked up to you and it's like, hey man, that shirt, I fucking hate that shirt. Like, I don't hate that shirt, but like you didn't ask me for that opinion. Like, I I put a lot of time and energy in my stand up, and like, if I want feedback from you like that, like it's usually never good feedback, first off.
Right.
And then like, I might not even respect what you're doing on stage. So like, what the fuck you're just gonna try and make me feel bad right now? Like, fuck off. Like, it's crazy. There's a lot of weird stuff, man. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it did just a fine job of answering the question. I think it did the trick. I want to shift gears a little bit from the comedy and ask you about your sobriety, because you've been publicly sober for a long time. How long?
Yeah, like I guess I'm supposed to like, I won't like name the program I'm associated with, but I haven't drank for like almost 12 years and gotten to stand up. Thanks, buddy.
That can't be easy.
Let's see if we lose it tonight. It's a lot. We still got like 5 hours till midnight, but yeah, I do feel lucky. I was just saying this the other night. Like, we did that show in Aberdeen, and that was a rough bar. Like I walked in and it was like, it was a fisherman's bar, like right on the docks and shit like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what percentage of the people there were alcoholics, but it seemed like most. And that would have been where I would be hanging out, like that, if I was still drinking, if I was still alive. So like, it's given me the opportunity to like live this life that I normally wouldn't live. I'm very fortunate. I've lost like 7 friends to addiction, and like, one of my buddies was like getting high with Aaron Carter, and he died. Like, that's a weird thing to have happen. Like, he relapsed with Aaron Carter, and now Aaron Carter's dead too. Like, so I know that's sad. I make like,
that's the truth. I asked about it. Like, that's the reality. Yeah.
Yeah. It fucked up my stand up for a long time though. I definitely, like, because being in recovery, the comedy in that space, like, you have to make jokes because it's like so twisted. And so I came in to stand up thinking like, oh, it was just the same thing as this, and then, but it's not. It's very like, there's things that are okay to joke about and not okay to joke about in certain places. And I would say in those like 12-step programs, like, it's pretty fun. Some like that people have a good sense of humor about where they were and what their life looks like now.
That makes sense. They have a good sense of perspective, been through it all.
Yeah. But there was a period of time, like, I think I always like jumped past the like actual getting sober thing. Like, I was waking up and like starting the day just being like, I'm not drinking today. And then the scariest part was where like I had no recollection. I just found myself drunk. And I was like I quit this. And like, and I think that anybody who, with any substance or whatever, like pills or weed or whatever, like, if you're in that pattern, like, there are resources and there's help, and those people aren't like, they're not going to hurt you. Like, they're not going to force anything on you. You're free to come and go. And like, they're you don't have to like be in pain all the time and be uncomfortable. So I'm not like, I don't wear that shit like a badge or whatever, but like it is important to share that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's kind of uncommon in the comedy world. Like there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things in the comedy scene. So like I think it's cool when you see somebody that's like sticking to their guns despite like being in an environment where there is a lot of temptation. You are on the road and like random people I'm sure offer you random things all the time, you
For
know.
sure.
And so has that been a challenging aspect of comedy for you because of that, or not
It's
really?
been an
Because
advantage, to be honest.
yeah,
I do think most, like, at local levels, like open mics and shit, there are people doing that. But as you progress, like, you're gonna lose work if you're fucked up. And a lot of clubs will take note of that, or rooms will take, like, bookers will take note of that. Like,
totally.
if you're unreliable, like, you might have this kind of under control, but that stuff progresses and it gets more and more, and you can lose work and your reputation for that. And I know a decent number of people have had that happen. So it's been an advantage. Also, like, dude, DUI for like having a couple beers at a show and then driving like long distance and getting a Dewey, like that. I don't know how much most people locally make doing stand up, but like, isn't it like 18 grand or something on average for the cost of a DUI, like total?
I'm not sure, but it
It's
can't be cheap.
it's a lot, and it's probably more than you've made in comedy that year for most people locally. So yeah, it's just not. I don't think there's anything really funny about getting fucked up and driving around. Like, I've done it a lot. I've been in cars with people doing it. I wish I hadn't, but I mean, there's something funny. That sounds pretty, like there's definitely. We used to play a game where we drive through parking garages and see how close we could get to the cars as fast as we could. Not the smartest thing, but it was a lot of fun, right? Like when we were hammered. But that friend's dead. No, he's but it's just, yeah. I don't want that DUI. Like I don't want any of that shit. I'm very, and I know like people that you would know locally and nationally and stuff that like they got blow and goes in their car and they have to deal with that, and like it sucks.
Yeah, that seems like a real pain.
In weed too, like people getting really stoned and driving like long drives at night and stuff. It's not a smart idea.
I definitely smoke a lot of weed. I don't drive because I don't have a car.
Yeah.
But I could imagine how that would come up if I were on the road more.
Yeah, I've seen people make mistakes, and I don't want to see. I've seen enough of my friends die over stupid shit, and I don't want to see more of them go. And not that this is gonna, like, this podcast is gonna change. Like, people we know are getting fucked up tonight and driving, so it's like, but it's gonna suck when that day comes. You're like, oh, that was like somebody I loved, and it's just, yeah, it sucks. I don't like this. I mean, I started drinking when I was 10, so like this isn't new for me. Like I was in the Running Star program for fucking alcohol.
That's intense, man.
Yeah, it was probably similar to what you did with, weed. Like, just like, I don't hate it, but it does. The only thing I honestly hate, and it's stupid, like when somebody comes up to me and it's just on their breath super bad, and you're like, I don't know if you were sober at the show in Aberdeen, but like,
Pretty sober.
you're just like being around drunk people gets old, and you forget how many of them are drunk a lot of the time too. It's uncomfortable, but yeah.
Right on. Well, what are your like current like goals, I guess, in terms of comedy, your career? You launched your Patreon. What are you like in the big picture and in the small picture? What are you aiming towards right now?
It's funny. I was talking to somebody on the way down here about that. I mean, doing stuff like this, like I was working so much I couldn't do stuff like this. So I'm really like stoked to be here, and I appreciate you asking me. And like I hope someone watching, I have said some dumb shit. I'm sure that I'm gonna look back and I'm like, fuck. But this next year, I kind of I want to do what I was talking about, where it's like focus on being around people that I enjoy being around. Try to be more available to people. Um, Hopefully, quit smoking cigarettes. Like I, I started doing that when I started stand up, just like as a anxiety response. And dude, it's that one crutch where it's like fuck it. I wake up and I can't. I'm like wheezing and just it's the worst. It stinks. They're expensive, and then I would like to get back to like basketball shape that I was in before doing stand up. Creatively work with, like, continue to grow my stuff, but yeah, take care of myself a little bit more. It's been 4 years of like insanity, and it's not sustainable. And yeah, that's the goal for 2023.
Cool, man.
What
Good
about
goals. I mean, I got a lot of little goals, a lot of little things that I'm working towards, trying to take everything to the next level with the comedy and video and pictures and the podcast, and really trying to just like hone in on my creativity is one of the big ones for sure.
Yeah, man. That's
any other thoughts or anything else you feel like we should have talked about that we missed here?
I don't know. I mean, I appreciate you having me come on.
Yeah, it's been really cool talking to you.
It was fun. If folks are watching and liked any of this, any of the stuff I've said, I do have a YouTube channel called Fadam and Friends, FADAM and Friends. We got a Patreon that we set up, but again, if you want to contribute, cool. If not, you don't have to. But that would help me a lot if you subscribed on there, and I don't know, listen to us, watch us wherever we have that. And I'm on Instagram, Adam Tiller at ATill55. Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Appreciate you too. And actually, you made me think of two last questions related to the podcast. First of all, I wanted to ask how you came up with Fadam and Friends.
The name? Or,
yeah.
My brother, I was fat when I was a kid, and my brother called me Fadam, and I hated that name. And so, like, the first stand-up joke I wrote was about that. And it was like, I was just starting, and we needed a name. I mean, we talked about this for you, like, search for meaning. You created the name, and now you're like, oh, I don't know how I feel about the name. And so, yeah, you pick a name, and it is what it is. I mean, I guess I could rebrand it, but it continues to evolve. So it's just like, it's the name.
And then the other question is regarding the Patreon. You made the Patreon in terms of branding for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you put thought into like doing that versus just having like one for Adam Tiller, and like when you're deciding that kind of branding stuff, how you came to that decision.
Yeah, I could have done it like Adam Tiller Comedy, I guess. Still can if I want to rebrand it or whatever. I don't. That it's probably where I'm connecting the most.
Do you post your comedy stuff on the Patreon as well, or is that pretty much strictly the podcast?
It's. I need to get my shit together. I haven't even thought about this. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do in terms of like if I'm gonna put together an hour that I want to release or whatever. So for the time being, we're gonna have the podcast be like that Patreon thing. There's so few subscribers to it as it is that like if you want to help me, if you want to support my art, here's where you can do it. I try not to like I know what it was like being a fan of people, and I don't have ads on my podcast. We're not monetized on YouTube. We're not like we have sponsors, but they're satirical. and I hated that shit. Like when I was listening to some of that like LA podcasts, he was just getting good, and then it's like Hello Fresh or whatever, and I like there wasn't anything funny about it, and I just like it got really old. So like I would like to keep it that way as long as I possibly can. At least in the spirit of like as being a fan of those things, I know what that's like. But at the same time, like you're doing this shit, it's time and money, and it's like uh it helps when people can't help. So patreon.com slash FNF pod.
Yeah.
If you can.
I do hope some people subscribe.
Yeah, man.
That would be great to see.
I appreciate the time you let me ramble and fucking I do this. Like I know like at times that it feels like there's not like any like why am I even doing this type of shit? You don't know what it can open up for you. And like there are people who have done projects like this that know what it feels like, and like I know it feels like you're shooting in the dark, but like keep doing. Like Dylan Fout just came on my podcast. Guy created the Place for Things, a website. His motto is keep making things, and it's like it's so simple. Just keep doing it, like, and things will start happening. So
cool, man. Well, I really appreciate it. Thanks for
buddy.
your time.
Thanks for having me. Oh, whatever. This is
we really killed that.
White guy.
And cut. Oh man, that handshake is so embarrassing. I probably should have cut it, but you guys deserve to know what fools we are. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Adam, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me. I feel like we barely scratched the surface of all the stuff we could talk about, so I hope we get the chance to do it again down the line. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, go check out Adam's podcast, Fadam and Friends. Go support his Patreon. And if you want to support me, hit subscribe on the button below. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.